allow me to introduce our next guest, the renowned jazz drummer Jon Krosnick, who has been a significant figure in the music industry for several decades. He'll be playing with Charged Particles for 2 shows in Inverness on Sunday, June 23rd, as part of the Every Blue Moon concert series. Welcome to the show, Jon.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you for having me, and thanks for doing this.
What got you interested in music, and who were some of your influences?
Well, I got into music because my mother had been an opera singer, quite serious, kind of pre-professional, before she gave that up to have children and decided that music would live in her household through her children. So my sister and I both started off really serious exposure to music at Interlochen, Michigan, the National Music Camp up there. I spent 8 weeks for 10 summers up there every summer, and started off playing piano, discovered percussion and drumming and moved to that, and then got exposed to Peter Erskine playing his debut concert up at Interlochen with Stan Kenton's orchestra, and that was it. I knew exactly where I wanted to go musically.
Good. Let's talk about the band Charged Particles. Can you talk about them and their formation?
Charged Particles is now 32 years old. The band was born in Columbus, Ohio, when I lived there. I was teaching at Ohio State University at the time and met some wonderfully talented guys who lived very near me, and we decided we wanted to create a trio that would play music that was inspired by the tradition of jazz, but that was contemporary and inspired in spirit by classical music in the sense of being compositionally complicated and requiring rehearsal time, but really showing an audience that we had done our homework in order to connect with them musically and intellectually during a show. We had really wonderful success based in Columbus. At our peak, we were doing about 140 concerts a year. We would also often do 5 performances in a weekend: Friday night, Saturday day, Saturday night, Sunday day, Sunday night, that involved travel around the state of Ohio and nearby states, and had a great time with that, and put out a record that got really nice reception from reviewers and lots of airplay. And then I moved out to California to start teaching at Stanford in 2003, and the band moved with me at that point, and the new band is very much the same. Murray Lowe and Aaron Germain are playing piano and bass respectively, and that trio is now doing more like 170 performances a year, not only in California, but also across the U.S. and around the world.
Jeez, you guys are really busy.
There is that. Our last tour was in Abu Dhabi, if you can believe that, for a week.
Oh my gosh. You get around.
We do. And, it's the travel, like, luckily, thanks to United Airlines, who kind of takes care of us, we're able to bring our instruments and we're able to do the travel reasonably comfortably. When we were in Abu Dhabi, for example, we spent a week there, did a concert at the New York University campus and did some teaching at that university. But we spent a week in a luxury hotel, Conrad Hilton Hotel, on the 32nd floor in suites, and played a series of concerts at that hotel and got very taken care of. So I don't think we can complain about being mistreated and having a rough life on the road.
Not too bad, my friend. Well, tell us about some of the places you've been playing in the Bay Area. I looked on your site there, and you guys are just about everywhere.
Well, there is that. We're very lucky that over the time period that we have been a band, we have had a number of special projects that we've involved guest soloists joining us, and we'll talk a bit about that in a minute when you're going to play some music. But I'll mention that the most recent collaboration we've been doing, I'm just thrilled and stunned that this is even happening, is with the great trumpet player, Randy Brecker. Oh. And so Randy is going to be coming out here in October. We're going to do a week of performances with him, a couple at SF Jazz, and then we'll do San Jose Jazz and Koombwa, and we'll do the new jazz club in Palo Alto called May House, and we'll also be going down to Los Angeles to do a concert at Vibrato, the renowned club down there. So that gives you a bit of a feel for that week in October. But we work all over the place in the Bay Area. We're always looking for opportunities. And, there are great clubs in San Francisco. Mr. Tipples and Keys Jazz Bistro are thriving as new venues with really great food and nice, intimate atmospheres. We love to play in places like that, but we do wineries and restaurants and concert halls and outdoor festivals. We're doing the Palo Alto Arts Festival coming up, for example, and other outdoor arts festivals and music festivals during the course of the summer. So we are generalists.
Thanks for sharing all that. Speaking of your music, you sent over some tracks for us to share with our listeners, and I'm really excited to play these. First up is a song called The Meantime. Tell us about this one.
When we were thinking about a new special project and a new guest to work with, Murray and Aaron and I thought about the music of Michael Brecker and the fact that Michael died in 2007 at the early age of 57 after an amazing career of performing as arguably the leading voice on tenor saxophone in the style that he played, but also a band leader and a composer and an inspiration for a lot of saxophone players. And so when we thought about, who might we get in to play the role of Michael Brecker in our performing, Aaron and Murray just said, obviously Todd Dickow. And Todd has been a musician on the San Francisco scene for a lifetime and very, very dedicated to Mike Brecker as an inspiration. And so he did turn out to be the person who was perfect for this project. His playing is spectacular. One of the Japanese jazz magazines recently called him one of the best saxophonists in the world. But in addition, he's a delightful person. He's an amazingly organized music director. So he brought to us lots of charts that he had transcribed and organized that nobody else was playing. And we started to play concerts. And one of the gigs that we did was at the Baked Potato in Los Angeles, the famous jazz club there. And they recorded it for us, but really not with a plan that we would be in any way releasing it. We just, have posterity, we would have a recording. And then when we listened to it, and when the wonderful drummer Peter Erskine listened to it in particular, who is an important inspiration and an advisor for us, Peter said, you should put this out. And Darby Christensen, who's the president of Summit Records, when he heard it, he said, we should put this out. So we ended up putting the record out. And just by coincidence, I ended up coming into contact with Randy Brecker, Mike's brother, just before the record went into production. And he said, let me hear it. And then when he heard it, he wrote this wonderful blurb that ended up endorsing the record on the back of the jacket.
Wow.
And that's what led to his travel with us. So what you're going to hear when you hear The Meantime, you're going to hear a performance actually at the Longboard, which is a club in Pacifica, California, up here in the Bay Area, of the quartet, Todd, Murray, Aaron, and myself. This is a taste of what that CD on Summit Records sounds like.
All right. Great intro. This is The Meantime here on Cows FM. We're speaking with jazz drummer Jon Krosnick on today's show. Up next is a song called Walk the Walk. What can you share about this one, Jon?
This is a premiere. As far as I know, nobody's heard this before. You're sharing it with your listeners today.
Right.
And it's a recording that Murray and Aaron and I made in the recording studio during COVID with another one of our special guests, Paul McCandless. Paul is one of the most talented, most inspirational multi-reed players ever in the history of music, I would argue, not to mention in jazz. He, for more than 40 years, was the lead voice in the group Oregon that played around the world. He lives in Healdsburg, and so he's nearby us. And he was a really powerful musical voice for me from early on. I think I could maybe even attribute my marriage to his music that I played during my first date with my later-to-be wife and still wife. So at some point, with Murray and Aaron's consent, called Paul and said, hey, would you be willing to do some performances with us? And he jumped on it, and we've traveled the world with him. We've played a lot throughout the U.S., and we wanted to capture that collaboration. So on the record that we're still working on now to be released in the future, Paul is featured on this track, Walk the Walk. The Walk the Walk is written by the drummer Mark Walker, who lives in Boston and has been the most recent drummer in Oregon with Paul. And it's a very fun composition. I especially love playing drums on it. So I hope your listeners enjoy it.
All right. And thanks for the exclusive listening for this track. It's called Walk the Walk, and you're listening to Backstage Sonoma. Jon, what are some of the high points been for this band, Charged Particles, during, as you mentioned before, its 32 years of making music?
It's been an amazing roller coaster. I keep thinking, oh, last year is the best year it's going to be. And then the next year, even more happens. And so it's kind of hard to know where it's going to go from here, but I'm kind of holding on to the ship as it moves forward and trying to keep up with the momentum that it's created for itself. Certainly working with Randy Brecker in September, we did a tour with him of England, where we headlined at the Scarborough Jazz Festival and sold out 2 shows at Ronnie Scott's, arguably the most important jazz club in the world. What an experience it was to be in that room. For your listeners who haven't been there yet, it's absolutely, I mean, it's, people who go to London who don't even know jazz and don't even like jazz know that it's the kind of place they should visit while they're there. In fact, I learned that, you can get into taxis in London and say, take me to Ronnie Scott's. They all know where it is, particularly if you pronounce it Ronnie Scott's.
Okay.
That works better, I found. It's just an amazing place with an amazing history. And to be on that stage with sold out crowds standing and screaming and demanding an encore, it's a real treat. So that was big. We also sold out Birdland in New York City, also a really historically important club with Randy. And again, same thing, standing, screaming, just such a high to play these tunes and to have audiences really love it. Now, the truth is, the way these shows work is it's not just song, 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 the end. We take our listeners on a journey through Mike Brecker's life. And so we talk about each of the compositions and how it fits into his compositional array. At one point, when he was in the last stages of his life fighting for survival against cancer, he was by himself in a hotel room having had a stem cell transplant from his daughter, and wrote a piece called When Can I Kiss You Again? And that piece, it literally brings tears to the faces of a lot of people in the room. It's just so delicate, so beautiful, so spacious. And that's in the middle of a show with a lot of energy and a lot of drama and a lot of variety. And we put this together to take listeners through that palette of musical concepts that Mike created. And Todd's playing is so amazing in capturing the spirit of Mike Brecker while still being his own unique voice. I mean, you listen to him, it's Todd Dickow, it's not Mike Brecker, but you can just hear the Brecker in it and infusing it and energizing it. And you put all that together and, audiences get it. And I would say, for me, those are among the real high points.
Fascinating story. And Ronnie Scott's is definitely on my bucket list if I get over to England. So with your many decades of playing music and instructing it and sharing it with people around the world, what advice would you give young musicians aspiring to succeed in this business?
Well, when Charged Particles started 32 years ago, we were a bunch of young guys. We were really interested in the music itself, that we were taken by wanting to learn and perform challenging compositions. And luckily, Caleb Hutzler and Mike Rack, who were the pianist and bassist who I started working with back then, were both composers. They'd composed wonderful original music. And that is an important starting point, that for a group, step number one is you've got to have music that nobody else has. Number two, you've got to have a way of offering it to people that connects in many settings. So in other words, enough diversity so that we could play an outdoor festival for 300 people, or we could play an indoor club for 200 people, or we could play in somebody's living room for 50 people, because you're desperately trying to get gigs in those early days and find ways to get your name out. And in the end, it's really, I think, about creating a resume that for the band, not only having performed a lot, but keeping track of where you perform, getting photographs of you performing, getting recordings of you performing, creating a narrative, a story about who you are and what you want to do with this group. And obviously, the more you do, the longer that resume becomes. But, I've seen a number of young groups of people who sound great, but they want to play, period. They're not inspired by doing the business side of it. And for me personally, I love the playing as well as the business side of it. So it was easy for me to do the collecting of information. And if your listeners go to chargedparticles.com, you will see the result of my obsessive compulsive collection of our resume. And so there's just about every poster that's ever advertised us there, and letters from presenters talking about how much they like the music, and photograph of us performing in many places, descriptions of our projects, videos, audio recording. And kind of somebody's got to be collecting that stuff, and somebody has got to be thinking about the big picture that you're trying to present to the world, so that when you talk to a presenter, they say, oh yeah, enough people are enthusiastic enough about these guys that I can trust that they'll put on a good performance. And I'll just tell you, we have just booked some performances in November in Philadelphia at the leading jazz club there, South Jazz Kitchen. And it was such a cool conversation with the owner of that club, because basically he said to me, I'm not worried about filling the room. We always fill the room. People trust us to come in and listen to this music. What I worry about is that what you offer will be something that musically and otherwise is so fun for them that they leave wanting to come back to South and hear something else. And that is such a privilege to have that, instead of so many venues that basically say, you got to bring your own audience. We have a room and we have some chairs, and you need to bring the people. And that's just a tougher burden for the band, especially for a frequently working band, or a band that's not particularly known. And I love the idea that, what we're responsible for is creating a great show.
The business side of the music industry is a tricky one for musicians, and I've heard some sad horror stories of things gone wrong, contracts that shouldn't have been signed that got signed. So I appreciate you sharing that wisdom with our listeners and aspiring musicians.
Well, it's funny you should bring that up that way, because just yesterday I was watching a film that was made, maybe an hour and a half film, of Maynard Ferguson's big band on the road. I was a huge fan of Maynard back in the 70s when Peter Erskine joined his group. And some of the guys in the band ended up making videos consistently for years while they were traveling, and put this little thing together. And very early on in the film, they show up in a place where, it says out in front of the theater, Maynard Ferguson performing tonight. There are probably 200 people out in front of the theater waiting for him to arrive. And that concert's not going to happen that night, because the presenter was a dishonest person who never paid a deposit on the gig and was not actually prepared to present the concert that night. So they drove to whatever city that was, and then they were going to, I think in Texas, and then they were just going to go on to Phoenix, where they were going to do the next gig, after being very nice to those 200 people on the street. And we've had some experiences like that. We were scheduled to open up for Al Di Meola, a guy, an amazing guitarist who I love, in Columbus, Ohio. And when he heard our band warming up, he said, those guys are not warming up for us. Luckily, we were able to talk him into, letting us do it. But I think, there was a concern about the contrast to what he was going to do. And the other group that I work with, called the Lunar Octet, Lunar Octet, that's based in Michigan, had an experience like that, scheduled to open up for Spyro Gyra at Hill Auditorium in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Huge 4,000 seat concert hall. And that ended up not happening, because when Spyro Gyra got into town and heard our music, they said, nope, not those guys. They literally had a mime open up for them, so that by the time they got on stage, people were desperate for some.
Wow, the stories you've got, they're great. Could you mention your website again? As a music journalist, I found it fascinating to comb through your website. But for our listeners, again, where can I send them to find out more about your music and schedules?
The best place, certainly, if there's only one, is chargedparticles.com. But we are also doing our part to have a presence on Facebook and Instagram and X. Every performance we do is announced there multiple times. And we share some of the resume and credentials of the band in the social media outlets, but mainly that's on the website. Speaking to you as a journalist, I think, one of our goals in creating the website is to give you and your colleagues, lots of material so that you can get to know the band, because I think the story and the history and the richness of our activities makes for, better journalism. And so it's there for you, but it's there for the public too.
That's great. I thank you from the bottom of my heart for doing that. I can't tell you how many websites I've been on, and it's like, that's it? Who can I contact? It's just frustrating.
Exactly.
Anyway, let me remind our listeners, Charged Particles with Todd Dickow will perform 2 shows this coming Sunday, June 23rd, in the Every Blue Moon concert series in Inverness. One show is at 4 p.m. and the other is at 7 p.m. Tickets and more info can be found at Every Blue Moon Concerts website, which is everybluemoonconcerts.org, O-R-G. Tickets won't be sold at the door on Sunday, but you can get them in advance on their website. Jon, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, and I hope you can come back again.
Wonderful talking to you. Keep this up. It's fantastic. Everything you've been doing for jazz, much appreciated, and I'll be here the minute you invite me.
Thank you, my friend.